Hello and welcome back to the RACI Pharmaceutical Sciences Group webinar on medicines labelling. I hope you enjoyed your break, and thank you, Scott, for that chilled out music during that time. So we now have Richard Driscoll ready to present. Richard, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready. You can hear me. I'm on mute. I'm not on mute, I hope.
You're not on mute. I think we're going to make it through the day with no one doing that.
All right, I'll share my screen and hope it all works out.
Great.
So share my screen to my sharing, I think. No.
No, I jinxed out.
No. Here we go.
Great.
How are we doing? Is everyone can see my screen now?
All good, thank you.
Right, okay, we'll get underway. So thank you for attending, and thank you for attending this webinar, and thanks to RACI for having me on. Also, thanks to Michael, Tony, and Catherine for their contributions and viewpoints. I think with Michael, he's been through the whole project management aspect of putting in something from scratch, which I imagine must have been very difficult and complicated. I, for myself, never had to go through that because I joined AstraZeneca when we had serialization systems already in place and mature. So I take my hat off to you, Michael, for going through that. I'm sure it must have been interesting. There's a lot of great information that's been discussed here. There's definitely some overlap between mine and Michael's presentation. AstraZeneca follows the same model, the level 1, 2, 3, and 4 systems that Michael talked about. We just use different vendors, but it's the same technology, it's the same process, same terminology. So it's nice to see there's a standardization in the approach, despite using different technologies and different vendors. So for me, my name is Richard Driscoll. I'm currently the site traceability lead at AstraZeneca North Ryde, as well as being one of the automation engineers. For us on site, we have multiple serialized systems of differing sort of flavors. We have a number of fully automated and aggregated lines, complete with automated case packer robots. We have a serialization only packing line, probably more in line with what Michael was talking about in his presentation. And we have a manual packing line with a manual aggregation station, where aggregation is done to pallet level with use of a handheld scanner. So there's lots of different ways to do serialization, and we sort of have a few different flavors on our site. So they all require differing levels of complexity and automation. So for me, I'll be talking a little bit about aggregation, which flows on nicely from the previous presentation, because that's sort of the next step in the process of serialization and traceability, as well as talking about some of the benefits, a little bit about data integrity, and in particular, what I wanted to focus on was how do you ensure your data for your systems is accurate, and how do you ensure that that's accurate all the time through the whole supply chain. So that's what I should be going into, and we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so what is aggregation? So aggregation is the process where serialized items are assigned into cases, and cases are assigned into pallets in a parent-child hierarchical relationship. Each child item then knows to which parent item it belongs, and vice versa. So you have this sort of link between them. So you can scan something and it will know exactly where it is. You can scan a pallet, it will know what items are inside it. You can scan the item and it knows what parent it belongs to. So the contents are verified from a packing line point of view. The contents are verified when an item is packed into a case and when a case is packed onto a pallet. And it also allows for this track and trace type traceability model, which is what I'll talk about on the next slide. And aggregation can be done at the case level. You can stop there, or you can do it up to pallet level, depending on your requirement and what you want to do. Pallet level is your optimal level of aggregation. So that's what you should be aiming for. So a typical automated process for us at AstraZeneca, for our automated packing lines, your serialized item will go through a checkweigher and then enter a case packer on the conveyor. It is picked up by an aggregation, a case packer robot, and then each item is scanned, which is known as what we call the aggregation scan. So that aggregation scan then checks the item to make sure that it's a commissioned item, make sure it's a good item, and then assigns that item or that row of items into the case. And then we pack a few of these into layers in the case, and then the case is sealed and a case label is printed and it moves on to the next stage. And in the same way, the cases would be aggregated onto pallets. So by using aggregation and using this method, it ensures that all your items are checked before aggregation and that only commissioned child items are packed into the parent item. What you don't want is a decommissioned or an uncommissioned item. So a decommissioned item is something that's failed a vision check or it's been damaged or something, and an uncommissioned item is something that hasn't even been checked. So what you don't want is those items making their way out onto the through the supply chain to the patient. And aggregation is one of the methods that helps you to do that. So if I'm looking at some modeling, this is slightly different to the point of dispensing verification model. I mean, you either say us with AstraZeneca or a contract manufacturer, you produce your goods, it goes to a distribution center or a 3PL provider, to a wholesaler, to a distribution center, pardon me, to retail pharmacy, and eventually and eventually onto the patient. So with the point of dispensing verification model, which is what Michael just described, your serialization enables products to be verified before dispensing or to aid investigation of a suspect product. I think what you don't get there is the visibility of where your products are through the supply chain, which is where aggregation and using what we term the track and trace model comes to the fore, because it gives you a full record of the distribution channel for a product that is scanned at each node in the supply chain. So, you know, if you buy something on Amazon, the example here is a FedEx, and you're desperate for it to arrive, you start looking at your phone to track it on the, on the app or on the website. You can see exactly where it is. It is at the distribution center. It's on its way. It's been delivered. It's at your neighbor's house or something like that. So the track and trace model allows you just to trace everything all the way through the supply chain, and it gives you that greater visibility about where your items are and what condition that they're in as well. So there's some notable benefits to aggregation. First one being it makes it much harder for a decommissioned item to make it on its way to a pallet through to the patient. With aggregation, you're forced to do what's called a reconciliation, 100% reconciliation, which I'll get into as part of the data accuracy piece. And as I said before, the track and trace model allows the verification of your product at every node in the supply chain, so you have a much greater visibility. In the event of a problem, it makes it much easier to find a specific item or a case. In the event of a recall, you don't have to recall the whole thing. You can identify the packs that you need to work on, and because you have that aggregated hierarchy, you know exactly what shipper it's on, and you know where that shipper is, whether it's on a truck somewhere or at the warehouse or something like that. Because you're dealing with aggregated items, this is a bit of a mouthful, but you have a lot of data moving between systems, especially moving between your level 2 system, your level 3 system, and your level 4 system. If you're aggregating at a pallet level, that becomes a lot less. So you actually have less management data, you have less data management overhead if you're at the pallet level. There's less data flying around systems, which can, which just makes it a bit more resilient. So if you have thousands of files going between systems, you might miss one, or if there's a network fault or something like that. So it's less things to worry about, I suppose. So yes, I was saying, imagine you've packed your batch and it's sitting in the warehouse, or it's on a ship somewhere on its way. You find some kind of contamination issue, for example, produced at a certain time. With the point of dispense model, you may need to recall the entire batch from wherever it is to find the items that need to be investigated. And you might have tens of thousands of items in a batch. So it's a real needle in a haystack situation. You have limited data on about what pallet the items are sitting on. So with aggregation to pallet level, it makes it very easy to identify which serial numbers are in which case on which pallets, because of the hierarchical model. So it saves you time and reduces risk to the patient, because you know exactly where your items are. Some technical considerations. I'm an automation engineer, so I will automatically jump to the technical aspects of things. These are things that I've worked with at AstraZeneca, and things that I've put in place or things that I've seen that I believe are good practice, and I think every site should consider this as part of their serialization journey. Firstly, this is a picture of one of our aggregation case packer robots, just for your information. Fully automate as much as possible. You've got to try to reduce your operator interventions and things like that. As soon as you have people in the situation, people will do things a different way. Human error is the biggest cause of errors in these manufacturing type systems. So with automation systems, you can have an automation system. Is it robust? You need to make sure your systems are robust if it's automated. You can avoid traps like aggregating to the wrong case or pallet. I'll give an example of that later on. Validation. Make sure that your vision parameters, make sure that your camera settings that verify the product, make sure your settings are accurate, make sure they're locked down. Make sure you do periodic revalidation of your vision parameters to make sure that your validated state is maintained. This all goes into data accuracy as well, and making sure that your systems are robust and you have the right systems in place to allow you to produce accurately. I'll talk a little bit about data integrity. For these types of systems, things like unique user access and order trading is key to finding out what goes wrong with these systems and things like that. User access, a lot of people will still have like shared access on legacy systems. If you have those systems, it's a really good idea to make sure that you try to phase them out through continuous improvement to introduce unique user access. Make sure your systems, make sure your HMIs and have order trading built in so that you can go back to a certain situation and recreate it if you have a problem on the line. So it's not just robust automation that you require perhaps, and data integrity. You also need to have robust documentation. So what are your operators trained to do? And it's not just operators. What are your QA personnel required to do? What do they do if they find an error? What do your warehouse people do if they have to intervene in a certain system? So a lot of this ties into general pharmaceutical manufacturing, but in order to make sure that your data is good and your data is accurate, you have to have these things in place. Make sure people are trained to work the machines and to do their jobs in the same way every time, because that's the way you make your product in the same way every single time. So speaking of I'll give an example of of robustness of automated systems. A couple of years ago, QA reported to us a reconciliation issue with the batch. So by reconciliation, I mean that your expected quantity is supposed to match your produced quantity. So in this case, it didn't. It was a little bit out. And we couldn't figure out why. So we went back through the user access logs and we went back through the audit trails of the machine. and we found that there was a manual intervention made into our case packer that actually that actually caused the problem. And we also found that because of this problem, we had an aggregation fault whereby the cartons that we produced were aggregated into the next shipper. So we had lost our chain of excuse me, while I changed my monitor. We had lost our hierarchy of aggregation. And the reason why that was because of the manual intervention. We also found that the code driving the system was not robust enough to communicate this intervention to the serialization system. So if you imagine with an automation system, you have lots of different systems talking to each other. So if our PLC system, which is doing all the moving the robot, that needs to tell the serialization system what to do. So in this particular case, the code written wasn't robust enough. So when the operator did the manual intervention, the robot did something, but it didn't tell the serialization system that it was doing this thing. So what happened was the two systems were out of step, and that's what caused this aggregation fault. So it really does go back to make sure your systems are specified properly, make sure all your handshaking is okay, your sequence control is okay. And that goes back to having robust systems, making sure that they're doing exactly what you expect them to. So that was a real example of something I had to deal with. We found the gap in the code and we modified that under a local change control. So yeah, it demonstrates that you need, if you're going to have automation, it must be as robust as possible. So next, that's a bit about aggregation. Next is on to data accuracy. There's a nice slide about data accuracy. So pharmaceutical manufacturing, data accuracy is a crucial part of product quality. So we consider that the data that goes with the product is as critical or as important as the product itself and needs to be treated with the same level of respect. So before we talk about accuracy, we need to talk about data integrity. This is also a critical aspect of pharmaceutical manufacturing. The regulations covering this are not new. I think everybody knows FDA regulation 21 CFR part 11, which is electronic records and signatures. However, different sites will have different maturity levels of data integrity, and also different machines will have different levels. So it's very important to be aware of this and try and have continuous improvement exercises to make sure that your machines are compliant with data integrity principles. So data accuracy is one aspect of this ALCOA framework, which I'll just define for you shortly. As I said before, the data generated by the process is considered to be as important as the product. So this is the ALCOA definition. So it's attributable. So actions are tied to the individual performing the action. Who did it? Legible. Can you read the data? This applies not just to serialization systems, but to databases, handwritten records, things like that. If an auditor asks for an audit trail, can they read it? Is it in the local language and not some kind of code? Contemporaneous, my favorite word. Data is documented at the time of the activity. So a technical consideration here is make sure that your manufacturing systems have synchronized time across the network using SNTP or something like that. That ensures that your audit trail on your case packer matches your audit trail on your SCADA system by time. So that's also very important. Original, you need to make sure that your data records, your raw data is preserved. Your databases, they need to be maintained and stored somewhere. You need to have a documented method of creating certified copies and things like that. This is all very important to ensure that your data is integral. And the last one I'll talk about is accurate. So that means it's error-free, complete, and consistent. And the main one we want there is error-free. We want zero error. in our for data accuracy. So for this one, there's a lot of data in the background. There's a nod to the matrix. There's lots of different types of data. So for serialization, there are three main types of data that we need to address. So first is the master data. That's your static data that will live in your corporate system. That's your identity, your strength, the market that you're going into. That will more than likely be pre-printed on your packaging. Secondly is your variable data, which has been talked about by Catherine before. This is the stuff that's printed on the line, equivalent to the label, manufacture date, lot, expiry, GTIN. Depending on the market you're supplying to, the country you're supplying to, you'll have different formats, potentially different fonts, different orders of things like that. They all need to be taken into account. And then you have your unique serial number. So that is printed onto each pack. It identifies the pack along with the tamper evidence seal, and also can be in the form of the 2D matrix as well, which has already been discussed. So with these, your pack can be traced back to the point of manufacture, right down to the operator who was working the line when the item was commissioned. So it really is, it really gives you that level of traceability. Also, there are problems if you have data accuracy errors. You can have customer complaints, batch recall, investigation by market authorities, breach of contract, potentially loss of license. I'm not quite sure, but you know, it's not good to have lots of bad data, I suppose. Right, on to the next slide. Right, so the main thing we talk about when we talk about data accuracy is this thing called reconciliation. Okay, so this can happen on the shop floor during manufacture. You can do reconciliation in QA when you're doing your batch release. You need to do it at the warehouse and during distribution to ensure that all your material is accounted for. So reconciliation basically means that your expected quantity is identically matching your actual quantity. So it's fundamental to data accuracy on any line or through the batch release process, or indeed through warehousing and distribution. This is the way that we ensure that quantities of produced product are accurate. And also refers to the matching of the expected quantity with the actual quantity. So 100% really must be the target of any reconciliation, because that shows that your quantities are accurate. You shouldn't be releasing any product to market without 100% reconciliation. There are one or two exceptions, but yeah, I'll briefly touch on them. But yeah, you should be aiming for 100% all the time. The one good thing about aggregation is that it forces you into 100% reconciliation every time. So let's talk about the process for data accuracy. So you start on the shop floor. You have your reconciliation between your commissioned serial numbers and physically counted packs is completed and entered into the batch record. If that's successful at the end of batch, for us, the batch is closed, which then it goes to QA. So then QA will then verify that the variable data and the reconciliation data is correct. If it's not correct, or if there's a problem, you can have problems with the data transfer between operations and QA. QA will reject the batch and it will go back for reprocessing or investigation. So it stays in that loop until we're satisfied that we have 100% reconciliation. After QA, it goes to through our QA release process, and then the product is allowed to be shipped. Then it goes into your distribution system, starting at the warehouse and then all the way through to the patient. So in this area, you need to have accurate reporting to demonstrate that your delivery has the correct packs and associated data. And as I said, with aggregated systems, you can scan the pack and you can make sure that your data is accurate all the way through. But you do need to have these comparisons all the way through the supply chain, through to the goods to market. In addition to this, You also have exception handling after batch closure. So you need a method of decommissioning damaged items or decommissioning items for samples and things like that outside of your manufacturing environment. So there needs to be a method of doing that. So that's a general overview of how we do data accuracy. During packing, so your variable data represents a data accuracy risk if manually entered. So on your shop floor, this is the kind of things that you need to look at to make sure your data is accurate. Robust automation and validation of packing lines. I've spoken about that already. Unique user identification, perhaps using Windows Active Directory, audit training where possible. Not all systems are possible, but you should base your supplier assessments on whether they can provide this kind of thing. Second signature authorization on all critical data entry. So when you're entering your variable data at the start, you need to program in some kind of second signature so the second person can verify the data. Written procedures detailing what to do if any data entry error occurs. You need to know what to do because these data entry errors, they do happen from time to time, no matter what checks you have. Written procedures that cover manual intervention of aggregated systems. If you have a damaged case, what do? You open up the robot cell, you take out the pack. What do you do with the data at the time? So you need to know what to do in every situation to make sure that people are doing things the same way every time. And you need to reconcile your quantities at the end of the batch. On some lines of varying technology, you may find that some people will do reconciliations after every pallet, for example, or at regular intervals, just to make sure that you have reliable data through your batch. It's up to the supplier to define that. So yeah, we currently on our serialization line, we currently do a reconciliation check after every pallet. But then on our automated case packer lines, we don't need to do that because it's all automated. So it depends on the level of automation that you have, if you have legacy systems and things like that. But as I said, you want to avoid having decommissioned packs packed into your systems. So during QA batch release, you need to do more reconciliation. You need to do a quantity reconciliation. So as I said, you must always aim for 100%. Number of items expected equals number of items produced. For serialized products, if you have less than 100%, it means that there are more physical items than serial numbers. So that means that you have an unknown pack, whether it's faulty pack, decommissioned, or not commissioned pack somewhere in your product stream. In this case, you'd need to stop and investigate immediately to find that pack. And that can be quite time consuming and quite hard. If you're greater than 100%, obviously means you have the opposite, more serial numbers than physical items. In some scenarios, this can be acceptable using a risk-based approach and a validated control limit in place with it documented how much over you can have in certain circumstances. But the ultimate game, the ultimate way forward would be to aim for 100% reconciliation through continuous improvement activities, technical modifications, and things like that. For aggregated products, because you're aggregating, it forces your reconciliation to be 100% at all times. If anything else other than 100%, the aggregation hierarchy has been compromised, which is the example that I gave about the reconciliation issue earlier. So another benefit of aggregation is to have your reconciliations at 100%. So the second thing that they have to check is your batch variable data confirmation. You must check that. And no product can be released to market without the above being accurate. Any inaccuracies must be suitably investigated. At the warehouse, so data is transferred between systems in the same way that product moves from the manufacturing facility to the warehouse. So if you imagine you close your batch, your data moves from your level 3 system to your level 4 system. The data has to move in the same way. So that needs to be considered. You need to make considerations about how do you sample or destroy product. You must mirror the physical movement of the physical product. So if you have to remove some cartons or destroy a pallet, you need to decommission its data as well. So you need to have a method of doing that. Typical examples: decommissioning of damaged product or product for sampling, repacking of items to a different case or a pallet, and unpacking of an item for whatever reason. Could be similar to distribution. We use distribution reports. When a product is dispatched, you generate a report to say this is the number of items that have been shipped. When a product is received, it's an identical report is initiated to say what has been received. As I said there, any destruction of product must have its data decommissioned to ensure that the physical product matches the data through all steps. This is where aggregation helps you as well. So the reconciliation process, summary of this. So at the packing line on the shop floor, variable data checks are performed. Quantity reconciliations are made to verify that the quantities match the expected. During product release, variable data reconciliation and quantity reconciliations are done to verify that the data matches. And then throughout distribution and supply chain, your quantity reconciliation is executed to verify that everything's okay. So this is how we ensure that we have 100% data accuracy throughout our supply chain. So in closing, some tips and tricks. Build and validate robust automated systems to reduce human error. Use good data integrity principles throughout manufacturing. I can't stress enough unique user access on these systems, second signature verification, and audit trailing. You must build that into your URS if you're attracting suppliers. Make sure that they comply with those. It just makes life easier later and more compliant. Aggregate where you can. So pallet level is ideal. As Michael touched on as well, ensure you have comprehensive service agreements with your serialization vendors. If you have a problem, you need to know that these people are there to help you, and they'll help you 24/7. Just makes life a bit easier from an engineering perspective, and things like that. Train your staff in data accuracy and data integrity principles at all levels of the business. Train your staff to be aware and to report issues as they see them, so that you don't get caught out. For larger organizations, try to align your systems and standards globally. It helps if you have someone overseas who's done it before, who can give you all the traps. If you have a global agreement with a global supplier, it can help align your systems and system versions. It just helps when there's to share the load and to share the knowledge around. It's much worse if you have one site having one vendor, another site having another vendor. So you need to try and align these systems. And the last thing, do your reconciliations all the time. And that's how you ensure that your data remains accurate throughout its life. So thank you very much. Over to Nisha, or some questions if there are some.
Thank you, Richard. I like the nod to the matrix there, because you know, listening to these presentations, I'm thinking this is a lot larger than what I initially thought.
Yeah, you're going to wish you took that red pill, I think.
That's a blast from the past.
Yeah.
We do have a few questions in the pool of questions.
Okay,
but
I hope I can answer them to the best of my ability. If not, I can get back to the people if they have them.
I'm sure you will. I'll sneak a question in before Peter continues with his presentation. Is it possible, and what happens if you run out of serial numbers during manufacturing of a batch?
Okay, so we use a SAP ATTP for our serial numbers, and I'd say it's possible, but I think because on the level 4 system, it's a corporate global system, those serial numbers are constantly being produced. I'm not quite sure how they're produced, but I've never had a situation where we've run out of serial numbers. That's through the SAP ATTP. You do have, for some markets, you do have manually imported serial numbers where you get the serial numbers from an external provider and you import them into your level 3 system. That is where potentially you could run out of serial numbers because there's a finite number of numbers that you could have, but your programming would alert you to say, I'm running out of serial numbers if there's only, say, 100,000 left. On site, we have to import serial numbers occasionally, but we import them of blocks of like 18 million numbers, and we regularly check our number database to make sure we have enough numbers. But technically, if you're manually importing numbers, which you may be required to, yes, you might run out of numbers, but you have to build the checks in place to make sure that you have an adequate stash of numbers to work with. For the stuff that's governed and the numbers that are provisioned automatically from, say, a SAP system, I don't think it's possible to run out of numbers because it's just an automated system. Although I don't quite 100% know, but I can't see it happening.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you again for your presentation.
That's a good question.
Thanks. And we will continue on with Peter's presentation.
Okay. I need to stop sharing. Is that right?
That's right.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you. Thank you. You've been so patient, Peter.
That's fine.
I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you. Can you see that now?
Yes, looks great. Thanks.
Okay. Well, thanks very much to Scott, Nisha and David who have invited me to speak today. My talk's going to be at a much different level because this is just looking at how in health we are trying to adopt the sort of advantages that the use of barcoding and technology can be applied to both patient safety and business efficiency. So this all started in 2019 when we started doing a pilot of implementation of a closed loop medication process. So we had a team of IT, pharmacy and nursing people, and we were working to produce a system whereby we could start looking at improving medication safety. Recent studies show that around about 40 and maybe even as high as 60% of most medication errors occur at administration rather than dispensing and prescribing, because quite often there's checks and balances. Some of the electronic medication systems have decision support for prescribers. With dispensing systems, we have allergy and drug interaction checking. We normally have, we do use some barcode sort of checking of the products that we choose. So in order to try and look at making a difference to patient safety, we were looking at how do we support nursing medication administration workflows. One thing is with positive patient identification. I'll talk about that later. The ultimate is to have barcoded medication administration. That is where we're able to scan a patient, scan the product that we're just about to give, and that matches the electronic record for that patient. So we're able to get confirmation we have the right patient, the right medication, etc. So why do we go down this path? Well, patient safety, to support clinicians in their workflows and business efficiencies, but it's also to build the foundation pieces that we need to do this, to achieve these benefits, because we know that this is just a journey we're going on. So we started to look at the processes that were required. So we were looking not to do it just for our hospital, which is a specialty pediatric hospital, but we wanted to make sure that any systems that we touched would work in all the New South Wales health facilities where there's getting an increasing amount of I suppose, integration of systems. So once upon a time, each hospital had their own systems and everyone wanted to make it, perfect for their own environment. But now as we introduce so much more complexity into our systems, we realize it's much better to have central systems that can be updated, maintained in the business as usual phase. And then we can concentrate on the things that we have to do for our own site. But the main systems can be maintained for us. So we wanted to be able to start this process, and at the very start of this journey, we realized that we had to know a lot more about barcodes. With the closed loop medication management, this is sort of a typical example where you'll have a doctor enter an order into an electronic medication system. This information then will go through to the pharmacy system, and there'll be a pharmacist that will verify that. And this is normally then pushed into a pharmacy system. In some fully automated systems, you could have a automated dispensing of items. But in our case, it would go into our pharmacy system, be picked up by a pharmacy tech, and then later checked by a pharmacist. We also are trying to incorporate the use of automated dispensing cabinets, which are sort of like very fancy vending machines, but they allow a larger amount of medications to be kept on the ward safely. In days gone by, pharmacy used to think this is a drug that has some risks about it. Let's keep it in pharmacy, and then we wait for a script to come down. We do the script and we send it back to the ward, which isn't very efficient. So with the automated dispensing cabinets, you can have reporting on what's being used, the way that they're being, that the storage happens is that the nurse is directed to where the drug is. And we can have the electronic medical record show only the items that the patient is prescribed. So we can lock down the drug selection from that device, but I'll talk about those later. So ideally, we would be able to identify the patient by scanning a barcode on their wristband. We would also be able to scan a medication product, and then that would communicate with the electronic medical record to say, yes, the correct patient has been ordered this particular drug at this particular time. And that would be electronically recorded. And as part of the normal processes, the nurses, the doctors will be monitoring the therapy, and they'll be making changes as required. So this becomes a loop with very little human intervention. So that's what they call the closed loop medication process. When we looked at our implementation strategy, we were using a particular brand of automated dispensing cabinets, and we needed to integrate our automated dispensing cabinets with our Cerner EMR. We needed to have some software that would be able to take the barcode from the patient wristband and the barcode from the medication and integrate that with the EMR. So all of the steps that we were looking at were very much barcode based. So we needed to produce appropriate barcodes for positive patient identification. We had to then have appropriate barcodes for all of these systems. We decided that for our automated dispensing cabinets, we would need to have unit dose packs, because rather than having a pack of 20 paracetamol 500, we would rather have a pack of a single paracetamol tablet. So that is changing the GTIN. It's a new product that we're making. So that has to be done in-house, because in Australia, there's very few unit dose packing resources available. Not quite the same in other markets. So the reason why we're doing that was to try to improve patient safety, improve workflows, improve the supply chain, because if we don't use ADCs or some kind of technological distribution system, once something leaves the pharmacy, I don't know where it goes. I know it was sent to the ward, but with stock that I've sent from the pharmacy to a ward ADC, I know what where the stock is. I know what the levels are. I can run a report. I'll get a report back to pharmacy if the levels drop to a established minimum. The other thing that we realised that it's also important for drug diversion, because it's very easy if you've got a cupboard full of medications. You know, as I say, we don't know where that medication goes. Does it go to the patients? So having a automated dispensing cabinet means that you know who touches the medication, because to get into the ADC, you use a fingerprint biometric ID device, and the software on the automated dispensing cabinet records who's touched the product, what's been taken out, and the pharmacy staff do regular reconciliation of the products. And if the nurses are taking out 10 but only saying they're taking 1, we'll pick up that very quickly because we know who's touched the machine. And even if the nurses aren't diverting it, they're just saving themselves going back to the machine, they'll find that the stock runs out, and they'll be in a worse state because, you know, instead of being able to do their work, they're having to run around to get stock from pharmacy. So it's in everyone's interest to do the right thing. But in health too, we realise that a lot of this technology has to be sort of balanced to what the particular healthcare setting is. So we know that some of these developments in technology may not be appropriate for all settings, but we think it's, as we move forward, these are the sort of things that we need to be making sure we have robust systems that can do this. So the first thing we needed to do was change our wristbands for our patients, because if we just have a linear barcode, that just normally represents the MRN. But we used an Aztec barcode, which could include information about the patient's particular episode of care in the hospital. So that would then be a unique barcode that was only issued during that encounter at the hospital, whereas this number here was just related to the patient. So we didn't want to have a system where nurses could have a list of barcodes, which they just kept for the frequent flyers, and they would actually have to use the appropriate barcode for that hospital admission. And we also developed an image-based positive patient ID procedure for places where wristbands were not appropriate. And that can often be in psychiatric facilities where there's potential for self-harm with wristbands. And sometimes in geriatrics, it's easier to have a picture that can be in the EMR, and that can be used as part of the positive patient process. Now, the hardware for scanning, besides just for positive patient ID for medications, can also be used for specimen collection to make sure we're getting the specimen from the right patient. And in other settings, it can be used for things such as management of express breast milk. So the hardware that's required for scanning of patients for medication administration can be used for other things, other patient activities. So then we had to sit down and say, what barcodes do we need for the various medication systems? Our pharmacy dispensing software and inventory management is called iPharmacy. It's used in many states in Australia, all basically except Victoria. And at the stage, it only had linear barcodes. So we thought that wasn't appropriate. And we had been using linear barcodes because as a pharmacy, we are mandated by the Pharmacy Board of Australia to use whole pack barcode scanning as part of our dispensing process. So we had already been doing that. But the problem what we were finding was that linear barcodes made for in-house manufactured products, particularly on 50 and 100 ml bottles, because of the radius of the bottle, the linear barcodes didn't scan very well. Our scanners weren't very good at that sort of around the corner scanning. So we wanted to adopt a 2D barcode for our pharmacy use. We looked at the ADC software for the Omnicell product. They have the ability to scan 2D barcodes, but they don't have the ability to put the information into the appropriate fields. And we also found that was the same for our EMM software. They don't have the native ability to deal with a 2D barcode because they are only used to doing a linear barcode and putting that piece of information into the field where the cursor is. So we realized that this was going to be a much more complicated process than we realized. And with all medication processes or products being used in the hospital, they needed to be loaded and mapped into all three systems. And they must be able to read the barcodes that were chosen. So as has already been discussed, we use the GTIN for most products. New South Wales Health has a hospital pharmacy product list, which is a group that makes sure that all pharmaceutical items are named exactly the same on our systems. So they're sort of, I can't put a new product onto my system. That's done centrally. So everything is named according to agreed requirements. You know, they'll look at SNOMED and various other things so that we have consistency across all of our systems. But at the moment, we are using 2D barcodes, but we don't have the ability to take that batch and expiry information into our systems. So we had that information in them, but we can't put that. So when our pharmacy technicians go and load our automated dispensing cabinets with product for the ward, they can scan the product in and make sure the right product goes into the right drawer on the ADC, but we have to manually enter the expiry date. So this is a huge problem because number one, humans make mistakes, and number two, it's, you know, it's silly. If the information is there, we need to be able to put it in. We also realized during our process that not all barcode scanners are equal, and we had to do a lot of work to make sure we had a robust hardware to be able to do that, because some wireless barcode scanners, you know, wouldn't pair if they were in separate bases. So we had a lot of problems with that, something that we thought should have been reasonably straightforward. Now, we had been using barcodes before, and typically we were using linear barcodes to put on our ward impressed cupboards, and we could take a handheld scanner, scan that product, put in the number of units to dispense, and then we could download a flat file from this handheld scanner into our iPharmacy to produce a picking list and to do the inventory activity. And in our typical dispensing area, we now have sort of wireless scanners as part of our normal processes. So we were able to change from our linear barcodes to a 2D barcode. That wasn't possible with the vendor, but we got some advice and were able to install the 2D barcodes into our own system, so that every product that we make internally, our manufactured products, now have a barcode. And our HPPL team at eHealth, they have a list. I think they buy GTINs, or they organize GTINs from GS1. So we actually have commercial GTINs, but we also have our own generated GTINs for the products that we make. And now these small barcodes easily scanned for inpatient and outpatient dispensing. So as has been alluded to previously, we are now starting to get a whole range of barcodes that are appearing. This is something that we would send to our ED, so and it sits in the ADC in our emergency department. So that gets loaded into the ADC using this barcode. When the nurse takes it out, they also scan that to make sure they got the appropriate product. And after hours, a doctor can write the instructions for a patient for them to take home. But we are seeing a lot of products now with both a 2D barcode and still the linear barcode. But the majority of products still just have the single barcode. But we really do need standardization. So with our automated dispensing cabinets, we were trying to, as I said, safely store a wider range of medicines so that we could keep more medicines on the ward safely, so that the medication was available as soon as possible, as soon as the doctor ordered it, so the time to the first dose was less. We also wanted to manage the inventory by linking that software with our iPharmacy, so to improve the efficiency of resupply. So we're not having a manual process of someone counting boxes telling us they're about to run out of penicillin on the ward. We wanted to also as I said, make sure that if someone had a serious infection, that we had the appropriate medications on the ward, but with some control. So we can have reports that are generated by our ADC when particular antibiotics are taken from the machine, so that our infectious disease doctors know that this drug is being used. So we can apply degrees of management using the ADC system. One of the big sweeteners for our nursing staff was that we're able to store our controlled drugs within the ADC, and the ADC software is able to do all of the documentation that is normally required in a DD register. So by the machine being able to identify the people that are using the machine by their fingerprint, and by the requirement of a second nurse to do the required checking, which is also their ID is picked up by the machine. All the information that's required for the poisons license and regulations are captured at the point by the machine. So the nurses don't actually have to do any manual entry. And that alone is saving busy places like our intensive care over an hour a day. And the nurses don't have to find the keys. Once upon a time, it was always a drama to find who had the keys to the wall safe. But that alone has meant that nurses are prepared to realise it can take longer to access other items, but the amount of time they save with S8 and controlled drugs is sort of, it's a benefit, and they're prepared to take the downside as well. We also are using barcodes when pharmacy staff take up the product. We scan the product into the machine, and for products that look very similar, I'll show you in a minute our unit dose packs, we get the nurses to scan them out as well, just to make sure that they have the appropriate product. So this is a typical automated dispensing cabinet. We have different levels of safety. So for something like a bottle of Mylanta, it may be in an open matrix here. A light will come on when the nurse selects her patient, selects the item that they've been ordered, and this cabinet will unlock and a light will go on there to guide them to that particular item. Items that have a higher security requirement will be in a drawer. And when the item is selected, the drawer will open, and we can have two levels of extra requirement there. We can either have a single checker goes to a locked bin, or we could require that locked bin to get a witness. So for our S8s controlled drugs, they all require a second person before they get access to the drug. But for some items such as potassium chloride, which is a high-risk drug, we can set the level of security that we want. So we will say, because of the risk of harm to the patient, we need a second independent checker to get the item out of the ADC. Even though the ADC has identified where the product is, we want to have a second person involved in the process. This is the fingerprint reader, and this is the scanner that pharmacy staff use to put products into the various spaces, and nurses will use to take products out. We're going another step forward as well we're having an ADC in our pharmacy, which is just for controlled drugs. So what will happen is this ADC on the ward, when its PAR level of S8s reaches a certain point, it will directly talk to the ADC in pharmacy. And we are then looking to integrate with our iPharmacy system so that we know what's been ordered, what's been put into the system. And we can also do things with this system that we can't do in the paper world. So because the ADC will tell the pharmacy system how much is required, we can dispense that in pharmacy. And once it's issued, we can send it to the ward, but we have a process. If that hasn't gone into the ward ADC within an hour, I'll get an email to say that, you know, what was issued at 10 o'clock hasn't reached the warders yet. So we can actually have much more accountability on this system because the two pieces of hardware are talking to each other. And if we don't get the the delivery of the product from pharmacy to the ADC on the ward, both pharmacy and nursing executive will be informed. And just as a bit of an aside, we've found in our implementation of ADCs, the use of the QR codes has been really helpful. So by using your phone to scan the QR code, you can get a whole lot of quick starts or cheat sheets about how to do different functions. So on our ADCs, we have similar things there, which a nurse who may be doing a process which they're not familiar with, they can just use their phone and quickly get access to information to help them with that. As part of those packing of the unit of the sort of automated dispensing cabinets, we didn't want to put whole packs in. So we wanted to make products that were a single unit. So we've used the GTIN, but because of the different scanning capabilities of the products, we've got a linear barcode there. The system can print a 2D barcode, but for our purposes, because of our EMM, our electronic medication management system, it can only use that barcode. So we have various sort of pods where we unpack the tablets out of blister strips, put them in, and they'll be put through this sort of manual strip packing process, and they'll have the name and the expiry, but only the GTIN. We're not able to put the expiry into that process. So we will put portions into the ADC, and there will be a par level for each medication. So if 10 was the par level and they get down and they drop below 10, there'll be an automated report come down to pharmacy for refilling that ADC on the ward. And we can set critical levels for places like ICU and ED, where we can't afford them to have items that are in short supply. On other wards, they'll do these reports maybe twice or 3 times a week, depending on the acuity of the ward. But in high-risk areas, we can make sure that as soon as a stock level is reached that we need to refill, we can be told in pharmacy. We even have I've lost that. We've even got a liquid dose machine, which not as fancy as some of the robots I'm sure that you have in your pharmaceutical companies, but it has been a big innovation for us because we're able to produce a little cup that has a standard dose of a liquid, and then that has a barcode on, and these pods are in the ADCs. So the nurses will take a pod out, take it to the bedside, and it may be 3 mils or 5 mils of a particular drug. They'll draw up what they need at the bedside, and if it's a controlled drug, they go back to the machine and do the waste, which is required as part of the poisons regulations. But it's probably really a syringe driver with a little bit of a heat sealing process, but that has been a really important thing because some of the biggest time requirements are that because of our poisons regulations in New South Wales, if we get to the end of a bottle that may have had 50 doses taken out, and we never knew what was in the bottle to begin with because we know there's overage and variation from our manufacturers. If the balance isn't correct in the register, I have to write a report to the health department, the nursing manager has to write a report. But with these pods at unit dose, that product is the entire bottle. So we don't have any of these problems with things going out of date. So that has been a great time saver for both pharmacy and nursing. And this is what they look like. So here we've chosen to use a 2D barcode, but once again, our systems don't allow us to put that expiry in. I'm just going to give you an example now of how we've just started to use sort of barcodes at the bedside. So with the COVID vaccination rush that we've all been through, we've set up a a COVID vaccination clinic in our hospital. And because of the work that we had done as part of our closed loop project, we now had the ability for our iPharmacy system across the whole state to produce a barcode and put that on the product. So during the COVID vaccination rollout, pharmacy at our particular site, we were drawing up these syringes manually in our pharmacy, in our clean room. The nurses at the point of administration to the patient, they had a clinical application for the vaccine administration recording. They would put their cursor in the batch and expiry, and they would click on the barcode, and that batch and expiry would be uploaded into the clinical application, and then that was sent to the Australian Immunisation Register along with the patient's demographic information. So it's just, and after we initially did our first round of vaccination, now all our vaccinators want the same sort of process on all our other vaccines, like our influenza vaccines and all our regular measles, etc., because they could see the value of them having that automated process to pick up that batch and expiry, that they didn't have to manually enter that. And likewise, the product from the from Pfizer also had both the information about that batch and expiry on a 2D barcode when we received the stock. And I just wanted to mention too, I've been hearing Richard and Michael talking about serialisation. I've just shown a picture of a product that we've just started to use, and it's by far the most expensive product that we've ever purchased. And at the moment, I'm taking a photo of this and sending it to the quality department of Novartis for them to release. But in reality, we need a system like serialisation, where at some point I scan this barcode and I get proof that this is a legitimate product. And the extra information that can be in this barcode can help describe this product, because of the cost of this product for each individual. We have 13 different kits available, so that the amount of stock that's given is worked out so there's almost no excess. So this is an example where at the bedside or in the pharmacy, we really need to be validating this expensive product that we received, and we won't be able to have a system where we need to ring, where we need to send photos to a quality department and then get an email before we can use a product. So our goal and vision really is to keep moving. This is a big process. It's a journey we're going on. So we're working with our doctors, our nurses. It's a whole of health sort of thing. So, but what we've found is that we need these data-rich barcodes with batch and expiry embedded, as well as product identification. And really, when this does get mandated, we can sort of say to our software providers that, yes, our ADC has to be able to read a 2D barcode. Our EMM system has to be able to read that. And likewise, all of the systems have to then be able to accept that product, and we need to avoid manual data entry. So we're also looking at, we've got a new redevelopment happening, and we'll be getting a new building by 2025, and we'll be using pharmacy robotic storage. And once again, these systems will scan whatever barcode is available. But if there's only a linear barcode, we'll have to manually enter the expiry. And the whole value of a robotic storage system is that they will be able to manage the expiry, and make sure any out-of-date products are being, or close to date products are being used, and we utilize our inventory as well as possible. So we believe that we're just on a journey. We don't have all of the equipment. We don't have unit dose packed products unless we make them ourselves, and we see that as a huge disadvantage. But we do believe that we need to use barcode technology to produce safer systems to support our clinicians in busy environments where they've got lots of distractions, things are happening all the time, and for business efficiencies such as, the nurses being able to quickly document their controlled drugs, and also in pharmacy where we're able to keep track of the inventory out of pharmacy and to have automated reports coming back to our pharmacy system, and also from our our management of S8s, we're able to have higher accountability so that we know that our systems are going to pick up any potential drug diversion. So that's all I wanted to say, and I've probably gone a little bit over time, but happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, for your presentation. Today's been a real eye-opener, and it's quite rare for us to be able to put on a presentation for the full span of, a supply chain, or a full span of a certain topic, from the regulator right through to the patient. So it's been a very interesting afternoon, to say the least. We do have a couple of questions that have come through for you. There's a couple of questions related to your what we would refer to as your quality control processes with this manual handling of medication from the larger pack down to the smaller pack, the stocking of the ADCs. Could you comment on any processes that you've implemented, or maybe the data matrices being able to help you to minimize errors in that process?
At the moment, we're producing our unit dose packs as we would do in our pharmacy if we were doing repacks of a 500 ml bottle down to a 50 ml.
Right.
So it's still a very manual process. Our iPharmacy will produce a batch sheet, and there'll be steps that we have to, and a pharmacist will check with the technician. What I've seen in other sites in other countries is that you document each process with an image, and you're able to then show the volumes that you're putting in. You're able to capture the barcode that's on the product. So I think in the future we'll be using more barcode scanning of our ingredients. So at the moment we're producing something with a barcode, but we really haven't taken that next step to having our individual processes managed with barcodes.
Okay, thanks so much. If you need to,
I've just it'll go through to someone else. Yeah,
okay.
But that's an issue. We're also speaking with our third-party suppliers of pharmaceuticals. Like, we get chemotherapy that's drawn up. We get lots of products from places like Slade and Baxter, who are making maybe syringes of morphine and fentanyl for PCAs, for pain relief, etc. We're talking with them to get barcodes on their products, because we want to be able to scan those products when we take them out of our ADC, and eventually be able to look at, we have smart IV pumps in our hospitals. We're doing a big implementation at the moment where we can have a smart drug library to make sure we don't, we have hard and soft limits on the maximum doses you can give, but we would love to be able to scan the syringe that goes into the pump, so it knows, yes, it is a morphine syringe and this is a concentration, rather than having to have someone manually pick, go through a small menu on a small screen and pick the right product. So we think in the future we'll be working to integrate our IV pumps, so that information goes into the patient's electronic medical record. But more importantly, the nurses will be able to program the smart pump from the EMR, and they'll have to scan the pump, scan the line that the patient, the lumen that it's going into, and scan the product they're putting into the pump. So we have the right drug, it's going at the right rate, we've identified the patient, but we've identified the route, the lumen that it's going into. So we see for the future, barcodes are going to drive so many of these processes. So the more that we start thinking about, how we move forward is going to be by thinking, how can we take human error out of this? Or how can we augment the processes that we do?
How
But we're not-
fantastic.
but we're not there yet. But unless we start,
It starts with the vision.
yeah, unless we go on the journey,
Yep.
we're not there.
And it sounds like an opportunity for more partnerships with the manufacturers as well, as you said.
The manufacturers are very happy to put the barcodes on, and they just want to know what all of Australia wants to do. So they'd much rather do it once and to have a standardization. So that's why I think sometimes it's been a shame that we haven't had that mandated barcode requirement, because the manufacturers aren't able, they're less likely to do something just for one hospital. They want to do something for the whole state or for the whole of Australia.
All right. Okay, thank you again. So at this point in time, I've got some questions for multiple people on the panel and some people in particular. So I just like to, ask the panel to turn their cameras on if they can, if that's possible, and speak up with any particular question where they feel it's more, they have something to add. So we do have a question around the governance and the regulator's point of view, and the question's based on if serialization has been considered as a way to detect points within our supply chains in which redistribution of reimbursed medicine, so medicines that are covered under our PBS here in Australia, from being then sent overseas. So is there a potential to save money for the government by implementing this serialization from that respect? So that would be Tony or Catherine, if you'd like to comment on that.
I guess I could start. So I guess there's been discussions, but so Ted, we've had a lot of conversations with Ted around where it's going and how the governance is going to work, but it's still all draft, so I really just can't comment much. Catherine might be able to speak a bit more than I can.
Okay.
No, look, I guess it's like Tony mentioned, there's still a lot of conversations to be had. I think we'll see more clarity and hopefully around that soon. That's probably about all we can say.
Okay, great. Richard and Michael, around managing data, it seems to be one of the more complicated elements of implementing serialization and aggregation. If you are implementing any serialization locally when TGO 106 becomes active, how will you manage this without there being a system to share it with or send it to? I'm hoping that makes sense for you.
I think. Oh, sorry, Richard, do you want to go first?
No, you go first. I was going to say, well, I was going to say there needs to be a level 4 system, some kind of corporate system. That's the only bit that I know and I've worked with. So you do need to have some kind of corporate system to store your numbers and to send your reports to.
Your recording
Michael,
has been recorded.
Would you agree?
Yes. Yeah. Essentially, it would be kind of like what we have implemented, just minus that step of.
You may now hang up.
That,
Your request has been recorded.
Please don't hang up.
You
Sorry,
may now hang up. Your request has been recorded.
Okay.
You may now hang up. Your
Sorry,
request has been recorded. You may now
sorry, what I'm trying to say is it would be kind of like essentially a system we've implemented, just minus that final step of doing the shipment transfer of the data to our customers. So by implementing an enterprise level system, that just becomes your data repository. You can start serializing product, and essentially as you commission serial numbers, they get stored in that enterprise level repository, and you can retain it there without sort of passing it on to customers or regulators.
Yeah, it's just that your data has to move with the product as well. So you need to have a method for that. So if it's, I mean, if I've interpreted the question correctly, if it stops at your level 3 system, you don't have maybe a mechanism to move that data to the endpoints with the product. You know, unless you, I don't know, you copy it to a CD and post it or something like that. But I mean, it's got to be a sort of a flow of data into the next system. I hope I've
Yep.
read into the question adequately and we're giving the right sort of answer.
Me too. I'm sure there will be another question if you haven't. So thank you for that. There's a question for the group, I guess, with Aspen and AstraZeneca are very large, successful pharmaceutical companies. What other options exist for smaller scale manufacturers where serialization volume does not warrant the investment in an automated process?
Yeah, I can answer this one. So this is something we actually did as a site when our serialized volume was maybe in the tens of thousands, not in the millions. We would just engage some of our carton suppliers to pre-print the serialization information on cartons. So this is, again, when we only had a couple of products, we would receive, it was a very manual process. We would receive a list of serial numbers from our brand owners. We would pass them on to our carton printers, and essentially for each batch we manufactured, we'd have to get a batch of carton specifically printed for that manufactured batch of product that we were making, and then essentially, yeah, provide those packs to our customers. And it is very manual. It's can be a bit fraught with danger, but if you've got all the right checks and balances in place, it can work if you are just serializing a small volume of product. Great.
Okay, that's good to know. We have another question around the approval of product labels. Is the TGA involved now with, or international authorities involved now with sign-off or approval of product labels with this serialization data on it? Is that happening now? Catherine, do you know this answer?
I don't, but Tony's just come off mute, I think, so
okay.
he might be able to answer.
So can you, sorry, Nisha, can you just clarify that again, sorry?
So the question's around whether the TGA or other international authorities are involved with a sign-off or an approval of product labels containing serialization information. Is there a need for them to be involved with that approval?
I guess just like our labelling orders at the moment do have a requirement for a barcode to be there, and we can very easily mandate it to be a 2D barcode, a data matrix code. And again, we would be just checking that the data matrix is present and that the data requirements are being met. We wouldn't be involved with any of the interoperability sort of, reviewing sort of whether, whether they were operating efficiently, but we can mandate to a certain extent and review it, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Peter, we have a question for you.
Yes.
Would your system eventually be used across all hospitals around Australia so that the info can be transferred along with the patient?
We're very much, the whole process was to be an all of state process, so that there's quite a few, the majority of systems within New South Wales Health are the same, but sometimes on different domains. So very much the processes are reproducible at other sites. And we have been working with other interested parties interstate. So the Alfred Hospital, we're doing very similar things to them. So we have been working with each other and getting around some of the problems. We have some very difficult problems when we're trying to sort of reduce that unit dose to a smaller amount. Like, how do we give half a tablet? How do we take 5 mils out of a bottle of 100 mils? So there are lots of things that we're all working towards, but certainly all the things that we've done with our systems, with the barcodes, etc., would be they could be used with a different brand of ADC, and they will work with the current systems in use in New South Wales.
I would just add to that, I guess, just briefly to Peter's comment. What they've implemented there is actually implemented in lots of places around the world. It's, you know, as much as it's really innovative and amazing, and we probably are not aware of it so much here in Australia, unfortunately, it is something that's really quite replicable because it's you know, it's based upon a standards platform and things like that. So
I think there's a few exemplar sites in the world, but when you do visit a lot of the places that are doing this, there are pockets of excellence, things that they'll do really well.
Yeah.
And other things which interesting, they won't know what their imagery is, but they're busy packing everything into unit doses. But I think it is a journey, and we have the ability to draw on people from overseas. But I think also it's very, very labour intensive. I think this is the sort of thing that we're struggling with in New South Wales, or certainly in Australia, because we haven't been used to putting those resources into these activities. Because and a lot of times it's been driven in some markets by either legislation, such as in California, the nurses have to have products ready to use and that they don't have to make up any product on the bench, but also to make sure the patient gets charged the appropriate thing, so they get charged for every tablet, etc. So sometimes it's the finance which is driving that, and the pharmacy is the enabler of that financial activity.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, and it's a technical one for the line. So Michael and Richard, if you're ready. So in predicting the number of final packages per batch, the bulk yield of, say, tablets needs to be known. This is likely to have some error. What is the % error these days, and how does this affect the final serialization outcome? And also, what happens if there's, you know, other issues on the line, like gluing problems with the coded label and errors like that happening?
Yeah.
Is that a quick answer? I'm not sure.
Well, Michael, do you do tablets down in Melbourne?
Yes, I think I might just have a go at fielding this one, and then you I think because you do full reconciliation with aggregation, it's
yeah, but we don't do tablets, so I'm not quite sure what if there's a limit or like what
okay.
the specification is.
I think with regards to that question, yes, obviously we make tablet bulks. There'll always be some sort of slight variance in terms of the full yield of the batch. So yes, from batch to batch, the quantity we make will be slightly different, but it doesn't really impact the serialization outcome, because when I guess Richard talks about reconciliation, 100% reconciliation, that's 100% reconciliation of the number of final packs you ended up with in your packed stock versus the number of commissioned serial numbers that you generated through your system. So it doesn't matter if your batch yield varies. All that matters is that all the packs that actually ran through your line at the end of the day were could be 100% reconciled against the data. I hope that answers the question. I think that's kind of where that question was pitched at.
Yeah, because it's at the pack level, not at the sort of tablet level.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just out of interest, what happens to the tablets that are sort of surplus? Do they just get destroyed, or do they get repacked into the next batch or something like that?
No, I mean, it's well, there won't really be. There's like a theoretical yield that might go up and down, but you'd pack out the whole batch. We'd have enough materials on hand to pack out a whole batch, and obviously enough serial numbers. There's always an overage of serial numbers as well for a batch, as you know. So yeah, we would pack out a whole bulk batch into its packaged form.
Yeah. There was a second part to that question, Nisha, just about the numbers, running out of numbers and sort of getting more numbers, which I actually answered as you mentioned it. But you know, if you run out of numbers on the line, on your sort of line level system, it will automatically, the process is called provisioning, but your level 3 system will automatically provision numbers back into the level 2 system to make sure that there's enough numbers. And then on the other side of that, when your batch is closed, any numbers that have not been used in that system are then almost provisioned back to the level 3 system for use by another batch if they're not being used and things like that. So the gluing question, I'm not quite sure about that. could be a sort of physical manifestation of the glue or something like that. I can't really comment on that.
I think that question might be more around like, what if on an aggregation station, like your pallet label, like it gets damaged or destroyed
Yeah.
during application, like how is that handled in practice?
Yeah, we haven't really. I mean, I know there's sort of material specifications for the, you know, for the adhesive, how strong it needs to be. I haven't really researched that. The systems we've used, I mean, for example, we use Domino for our shipper label, for our case label printers. We've never really had that issue. So I don't really know. I mean, it's like I suppose things are made to a certain specification. If there's some variability with your supplier in the quality of the glue or quality of the adhesive, you probably need to go back to them. I mean, we have had issues with suppliers in the past for other things where there's a bit of variability in the quality, perhaps. I don't really have an answer for that.
Okay, I think that's okay. I think we're out of time, and I think you did very well from the sounds of it. So I'd just like to wrap up and give a formal thank you to all our presenters today. It was a great team effort, and it was very informative, and we thank you for your time. And also a big thank you to the RACI committee who produced this webinar today for the benefit of our industry and you today who are watching, in particular David Edmonds and Scott Colburn as well, who are working very hard behind the scenes. Sorry, Nisha. The kids are home, so good time to say goodbye and thank you once again.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye,
everyone.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.